Dragons. Asian cultures see them as godlike entities. Vikings told stories of huge fire-breathing reptiles. Medieval tales speak of brave knights slaying scaly beasts. The myth of the dragon is everywhere, and there are almost as many representations of dragons as there are stories about them. My name is Elliot Wilkes, and I'm about to take you on a journey of mythic proportions into the world of these great beasts. When researching the dragon myth, a sensible place to start seemed to be what possible origins the myth could have come from. There are a number of theories, including early whale bone discoveries, early dinosaur bone discoveries. There are also sightings of unusually large reptiles such as snakes and crocodiles, as well as stranger extreme weather phenomenon, and of course a healthy dose of human imagination running wild to fill in the blanks. Now, let's discuss how most of us first learned of dragons. Stories of magic and wonder told by great authors. I was able to talk to Chris DeLacy, one such author that has enjoyed plenty of success through writing stories both about and with dragons in them.
When I started to write about dragons initially, it was purely by chance. And I won't go into detail about that, but one thing my editor said to me that's always stuck in my head is this. She said, "Dragons are wired into the human consciousness," which is a terrific line. And the reaction from people around the world was amazing. I was actually stunned. I was at one time when the Last Dragon Chronicles were really, when they first came out and they were at their height, I was getting something like 200 messages a week, emails from kids, highly appreciative of the books, of the fact that the dragons were a little bit different in my books, because in the Last Dragon Chronicles, the dragons, of course, are clay dragons that can come to life. But they've always been incredibly supportive, and they always wanted to tell me their stories about dragons and their own thoughts about dragons, and share all sorts of things with me. So yeah, incredibly supportive, and it really amazed me how widespread the love of these creatures is.
As one of the most popular and widespread myths worldwide, it is no surprise that there is an almost endless supply of books with dragons in them in some form or other. From Pete's Dragon to The Hobbit, dragons in stories are popular among audiences of all ages, and there seems to be no end in sight.
Most of the messages that I got were from children, but I would get an awful lot of messages as well from adults who read the books and liked them just purely because they love dragons. And in fact, one of the interesting things is a lot of the children who've grown up with the books, because the first book of the Last Dragon Chronicles came out in 2001, and of course a lot of the 10 and 12-year-olds who read those books back then are now in their, almost pushing their early 30s, and they still write to me now. And I still get messages now from people who say, "I read them when I was really young, and I really like them. I've read them again. I've passed them on to my children," that kind of thing, or my younger siblings. And so it's great, yeah.
He also described what he believes a dragon would look like and act like if they were to exist in the real world.
But I like the typical model, the classical model that you'll find in the sort of New Age shops. The sort of glistening scales and jeweled eyes and big horns, that kind of thing. Because I always see them as highly intelligent creatures. Certainly not savages, although they would certainly be capable of savage acts if necessary. They would have phenomenal intellectual ability, capable of strange things with the mind, such as telepathy or being able to project images outside the mind. And they were always very spiritual creatures, and I've always thought of them as spiritual. I mean, certainly killers if they needed to be, but they would never kill for killing's sake.
This got me thinking about what a dragon really would look like, so I did a little digging. Obviously, an expert in dragon physiology is hard to come by, but fortunately I didn't need one. I found an online article discussing if the dragon seen in the immensely popular show Game of Thrones would be capable of flight in real life. To do this, the conductors of the study enlisted the help of ornithologist, that's an expert in birds, Kevin McGowan, and paleontologist, that's an expert in fossils, Michael Habib. McGowan suggests that if dragons had a similar physiology to birds, it would be practically impossible for them to take off the ground. Look at an albatross, which weighs roughly 25 pounds and needs a wingspan of 10 feet. This being the case, how large would the wingspan of a 2,000-pound dragon need to be? Honestly, the math doesn't matter, as it would be many times larger than that of the dragons depicted in Game of Thrones, although it would be very impressive. Turning then to Habib, he suggests that theoretically it could be possible if their physiology was closer to that of a giant pterosaur, which isn't unlike modern day bats. They would need membrane wings attached to elongated fingers, and so would not need to be as large as those of a bird. However, this would depend greatly on other factors. For a start, dragons would need hollow bones to be light enough, but also to withstand the mechanical forces of flight, and it would be more difficult to take off compared to a bird. Whereas a bird simply flaps its wings and jumps a bit to get into the air, a dragon would have to get a run-up using powerful, muscular legs, and potentially even its arms, to gain enough strength to lift off the ground, which would make it next to impossible to take off from being stood still. All this makes sense in theory, but of course there's no way to be sure. Until now. I have built a device, don't ask me how, allowing me to travel to a fantasy realm where dragons are said to exist. I made it using spare parts from an old police box and a weird looking car that was parked outside. All I have to do is push this big red button and I'll be warped to the magical alternate world. Here goes nothing. Well, okay, that was uncomfortable. I feel like I just got turned inside out. Still, it seems to have worked. Alright, since I seem to be in one piece, I'd better head to the local guild hall to talk to some young adventurers. So, I've had a quick chat with the bartender, and apparently, although dragons do exist here, they are very rarely seen. However, there's 3 people here who each claim to have seen a dragon on separate occasions. I'm going to go and talk to them, and ask them what a dragon looks like, as well as how they act.
They're really big, they've got scales, they've got big wings, but they don't use them much. They've got a really big head, with horns, and they've got really big teeth and big eyes, really massive cat eyes, they're really bright. They're actually defensive because they've got the treasure, but they're really aggressive if you try and hurt them or try and take their treasure. And as I said, they do fly, but they don't do it if they can afford not to. And they also breathe fire.
So a dragon is like a big lizard and has got dark black skin with sort of scaly texture. They're about the size of a small house. They've got many rows of teeth. They've got big wings. They're very similar to a shark. They will only attack if provoked. They're mostly calm and get on with their own life, but when they want to, they can be vicious, dangerous.
Well, they have a long red beak, big eyes, and a long sort of orange and red mane, that's the word, mane down the back of their neck and back, and a long scaly tail. Big wings. They're super friendly. They always help out the people that work with them and live in the area, and they're really clever. They can tell immediately when something's wrong, and they go to help, and they're sort of part of the community.
Well then, it would seem that even here dragons remain elusive and mysterious creatures, so it looks like I won't get to see one for myself, but these 3 have certainly shown me that dragons come in many shapes and sizes. This seems like a really nice place though, so I'm definitely going to come back here at some point. For now, we have places to be and people to see, so let's get going and head back to our world. In fact, I'm going to talk to Dr. Leon Rocha, a senior lecturer in Chinese history and society, who is going to take me on a quick tour of China to tell me all about their interpretations of dragons. I'm never going to enjoy this part. Oh boy, that's not fun. So this is China. It's really nice here too. While we wait for Leon, let's have a quick read of this tourist leaflet I've definitely had on me this whole time. Most Eastern interpretations of dragons share much in common. Often, in many variations, these Eastern dragons are considered godly or spiritual beings, causing them to hold great cultural significance throughout much of ancient history. Many interpretations see dragons as protectors of water, which can manifest as them being river spirits or the river itself. In some cultures, that is why the dragon is a serpentine shape, as it reflects the curving and winding of a river. Others were seen as able to control weather, such as rainfall and so on. As a result, these water dragons were worshipped as bringers of life and vitality, since water is such a vital part of all forms of life. Interesting, there's a lot of good stuff in this leaflet. I see Leon walking over now, so it's time to begin the tour.
In traditional Chinese culture, dragons are very much a symbol of auspiciousness and luck, strength and harmony, all fairly positive attributes. It's actually quite hard to pin down the origins of the dragon. So from what we know from archaeological evidence, there have been representations of dragons or kind of dragon motif objects that date all the way back to like about 4000 BCE. In fact, specifically in the Neolithic Hanshan culture, which is now sort of modern day Inner Mongolia and Liaoning, where they found these jade badgers that have a sort of little dragon type of shape on them. And then in another part of China, towards the Yellow River, the so-called Neolithic Yangshao culture, dating back to, let's say, around 4000, 3000 BCE, archaeologists found in 1987 they found a dragon statue. So we know that dragons have always been a key kind of legend or key kind of motif. After the Tang dynasty, in the Song dynasty, it was actually it was encoded in law that the dragon is the symbol of the emperor and the empire, and civilians were not supposed to use dragons in any kind of motifs and so on and so forth. Of course, that didn't actually, in practice, that didn't stop civilians from using dragon in kind of architectural motifs and things like that. That came, I think, in the Yuan dynasty. The Yuan dynasty is the Mongolian dynasty. So we're talking about the 13th and 14th century, and that was when it was codified that a dragon, specifically with 2 horns and 5 claws, would be for the emperor's exclusive use. And then I think and then there's a little bit of complication when it starts getting to like 3 claws or 2 claws and so forth. Then they are sort of fake dragons, so they're not really real dragons, and therefore like civilians would actually be allowed to use them. This carried on into the Ming dynasty and the Qing dynasty, so we're going into 15th, 16th, 17th and the 18th century and the 19th century.
What an incredible culture. What intrigues me the most is how far removed these ideas are from Western depictions of dragons. Both images can certainly be called dragons, but they are so different from one another. I'm very interested by the difference in how dragons are perceived. As mentioned, in Eastern cultures, dragons are seen as deity-type entities who protect and are good, and yet Western depictions see them as vicious monsters who pose a great threat and must be hunted and slain. Speaking of which, we have one more place to go, and that, my friends, is back to Lincoln, so strap in, because we've got one more warp. Alright, let's do this. Nope, still not fun. Now that we're here, I'll explain why. We've looked into why stories of dragons are so popular. However, what if you're looking for something a little more immersive? The answer, of course, is computer games. It's all well and good hearing about how a brave knight slayed a mighty beast, but imagine what it would be like to slay one yourself, or even to be one for that matter. Fortunately, you don't have to imagine it. With games, you can just log in and do it. I'm here to meet with the president of the University of Lincoln's Gaming Society, Joshua Wilson, who's going to tell me more about how dragons appear in games. In fact, here he is now.
So usually, from my perspective, it tends to depend on the genre of the game. So for example, with games like Monster Hunter and Skyrim, where you're fighting dragons, they tend to be more action-y, more RPG-like, while games where dragons are good tend to be more adventure-based, because you're usually playing as the dragon. Because dragons can be amazing opponents, but they're going to be really important, like key characters within the game. Like for example, in the role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons, they have a range of dragons, and each of them have different specific traits. Some are lawful good, some are lawful evil, some are chaotic good, some are chaotic evil, some are just completely neutral. And even then, the dungeon master has the influence to make the personalities of those dragons, whether or not they are lawful good but completely not as snobs. And your aim of the campaign is to get rid of the completely not as snobby dragon. So again, it ultimately depends on the perspective that the dragon is put in compared to how the player is interacting with the dragon. They're one of the most recognisable, if not the most recognisable, mythical creature in world mythology. It's just that these are just impressive creatures that could potentially have existed because they're so well recorded, but more than likely don't exist. The intelligence of a dragon doesn't necessarily affect whether or not a dragon is liked or not. Dragons that are intelligent tend to you tend to be able to define them as good or evil because their personality, the way they act. Dragons that are animals tend to act as animals. It mainly allows you to define the dragon and a personality and give it a personality more than anything. Dragons that are made to be seen as not intelligent are just animals.
Some very interesting trends there. Many are also seen in literature too, like the dragons who are more integral to the story are often depicted as possessing at least some level of intelligence. Sadly, this brings us to the end of our journey. I hope you've learned more about the fascinating myth of the dragon and go on journeys of your own in the future to find out more about whatever it is that interests you. For now though, I'm going to go back to that fantasy world for a bit. Oh, maybe I could learn magic or something. That would be pretty cool. Oh no, I dropped the warping device. Oh, that's really broken. Nuts. Well, I suppose on the plus side, I don't have to warp again. I guess this world is stuck with me now. Maybe we'll meet again then. Goodbye for now, and keep on learning.